Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People Policy Institute's Inside Analysis and look at Israel's war against Hamas. Today, instead of our regular format of having an interview at the top and then a panel to continue, we're going to start with one of our very own, Shmuel Rosner, a senior fellow at JPPI, who recently conducted on behalf of the Institute a very interesting poll of what's happening in Israeli society, the sentiments and feelings towards our politicians, towards the government, towards the IDF, towards one another, towards our different politicians, and of course the war itself. So we'll hear from Shmuel, who will present to us some of those slides, and as well as his analysis of what they mean for Israel and what they mean for the future of this conflict as it does move ahead and does not seem like it's ending anytime soon. I remember in the beginning when they were saying to reservists a few weeks ago, be prepared to bring your menorahs back when you go home. I kind of chuckled that off. Now when I hear they're not yet saying bring the matzah because they're not yet baking the matzah, but when they do start to say to people, be prepared to eat matzah as reservists in uniform, that is something that is not a joke and should definitely be taken serious. After we hear from Shmuel, I've convened Gil Troy, senior fellow at JPPI, as well as Alona Chagai Frey, a fellow at JPPI, a law expert, and also someone who specializes in gender studies, because both Alona and Gil have both written very interesting pieces recently. Gil wrote a piece that was published in Tablet that was called "The Feminists Are Consenting to Hamas's Rape Culture." And Alona had a piece that was published the other day in Moment magazine, breaking the silence on Hamas's war crimes against women. And one of the big stories, obviously, to those who have been following this war, is not just the crimes against women, but the way the world has been responding to this, or the deafening silence that we've heard from the world. So it's definitely a very super important subject. We have two great experts who are with us to discuss it. Before we get to that, Shmuel, take it away.
Thank you, Yaakov, and hello, Gil and Alona. And what I'll try to do now is to share with you some of the findings of several JPPI surveys that were conducted in the last couple of weeks. We started, JPPI regularly poll Israelis to have findings about our culture and trends and issues concerning pluralism and other topics that we talk about on regular days. But right at the outset of the war, we decided to run regular polling to look after the trends and the changes in Israeli society as the war progresses. And what I'm about to share with you are findings from 2 or 3 polls that we conducted, and concerning several topics. I can't share all of our findings because you'll have to be here for a much longer time, but hopefully we'll see some things that can shed light on some of the interesting topics that Israeli society is going through. So first, we'll begin with Israeli confidence that Israel is likely to win the war. What I'm showing on screen are 2 polls from October and November. So we have the first and a half week of the war, and then a poll that was conducted about a week ago. And as you can see, by and large, Israelis seem confident that the country will ultimately win the war. What it means to win the war, of course, can be a matter of some discussion and debate. But by and large, when we ask people to rate their level of confidence from 1 to 5, as you can see, a majority will put it at 5, high level of confidence, and another about a quarter of Israelis would put it at 4. So the combined number of Israelis who say, yes, we are going to win this war is around 80%, and that's quite impressive and did not decline between October and November, even with the ceasefire in place in the last week or so. What does it mean to win the war? So we asked, what should happen, or what needs to happen for Israel to be victorious in the war? As you can see in this slide, there are differences of view between coalition and opposition, but by and large, the majority view, or not the majority view, but the more dominant view, is that the most important thing that must happen is to end Hamas rule over Gaza. Of course, people want the hostages to return home. And of course, people understand that it's essential for the towns and villages near the Gaza border to feel secure enough to return to their homes. But still, the most dominant view is the one pertaining to Hamas rule over Gaza. I'm not sure if Yaakov was going to mention it, but just today, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that those people who still ask questions as of whether Israel intends to go back to fighting Hamas should have no such doubts. Israel still intends to go back to war and to uproot Hamas. That's the declared intention of the Israeli cabinet. And as you can see, the Israeli public is by and large supportive of such cause. Personal concerns about the security situation. Here you do see a difference between October, when the shock was still very fresh and people felt insecure in their homes or neighborhoods, etc. And as you can see, the number or the share of people who say they're very worried, feeling personal concern about their own security, declined from 42% to 27%. So we do see a change. We do see Israelis becoming somewhat less afraid for their personal security between October and November. They're also becoming slightly, not enough, but slightly more optimistic about the future of Israel. If October was the month of shock and devastation, and the share of Israelis who are very optimistic about the future of the country went down to 35%, about a third, it is now slightly going up. It's 43% for very optimistic and 31% for somewhat optimistic. So we are gradually climbing back to a state of a more optimistic view when we look at the general thinking about the future of Israel. What about our state as a society? All of you must remember on October 6th, just the day before the vicious attack by Hamas, Israel was a highly divided country because of what happened here in the previous year. All the debates about the judicial reform, coalition versus opposition. Since then, Israel became more united. In many ways, you see Israelis coming forward to volunteer, to join the military, to bake and cook for the soldiers, to help the families of the hostages. This sense of unity is much more intense in Israel today. And as you can see, 20% of Israelis say that Israel is very united. That's a slight decline from October. And 57% say it is somewhat united. So on the united versus divided society theme, we are still very much in the camp of the united society, which we weren't on October 6th. October 7th changed the way Israelis see or view their own society and their sense of belonging to the society at large. Israel is unique, and we discussed this, Yaakov, as you remember, many times before. Israel is unique in the way it reacts politically to the devastation. In most countries, when a country is attacked, there is a phenomenon of rallying around the flag and the leader during a time of war. This did not happen in Israel. The level of trust in Prime Minister Netanyahu, which was very low before the attack and before the war, the level of trust in the Prime Minister did not return to, so to speak, normalcy. You do not see Israelis coming around to support the leader, the Prime Minister of the country. In fact, there is a very slight change between October and November. The level of trust in Prime Minister Netanyahu is solid in the sense that it is not changing. This is not the case for the leadership of the IDF. Remember that the IDF had, absorbed a severe blow on October 7th. It was clear that both the intelligence and the operational response to the attack was insufficient. This is something that both the chief of the IDF and many other commanders admitted, that the IDF was not well prepared for the attack, and hence it was natural to expect that in October, right after the attack, the level of trust in the IDF will be slightly lower than usual. And we saw that people who had very high trust in the IDF officers went down. But in November, we did see the beginning, again, of a climb back to normalcy. By and large, the IDF enjoys the support of most Israeli citizens, and we do see that the level of trust in the high command is going back up. And the more the IDF fights, and if the fighting is seemed by Israelis as going well, right, we can expect that this level of trust will continue to rise with time. I know that I don't have much time, Yaakov. I'll make it short. The fact that we now have some type of unity does not mean that we agree on the day after. And one of the things that we must accept is the fact that within Israel there are still difficult debates to have for the day after the war, even on things that are connected directly to the war, such as who should rule the Gaza Strip after the war. As you can see, the debates here, or the differences here between the view of opposition supporters and coalition supporters is pretty significant. Most coalition supporters, 16% and 44%, would want Israel to rule the Gaza Strip. Some of them just say Israel should rule the Gaza Strip. Some of them say Israel should rule and should also go back to implanting Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip. So that's the majority view of coalition supporters. We just completed conducting a survey of ultra-Orthodox Israelis, and among ultra-Orthodox Israelis, it is even more common, this view that Israel should go back to Gaza and have settlements in Gaza. On the other hand, on the opposition, you don't see such a desire to have Israel as the ruler of Gaza, and certainly not to have settlements going back to Gaza. It's 4% and 5%. So a combined 11% of opposition supporters versus combined 60% of coalition supporters. This is a debate that Israelis will have as the war goes forward. Another not a difference, but another things that we should highlight as we think about the day after is that within Israeli society, there is a small but still significant majority of people who expect to see a significant and prolonged period of change in Israel. They expect that Israel after the war will not be the same Israel that we saw before the war. You don't see the number on your screen, but again, here, there are clear differences between expectations of opposition supporters. They want a dramatic change of Israeli culture, society, politics. Coalition supporters expect some change, but they don't expect the change to be as dramatic and as long-term as opposition supporters expect. And this could lead again to strife and to debates and to frustration and to all these things that made Israel divided just before the war. One last thing before I end for our audience abroad. With this, we asked Israelis about anti-Semitism abroad, and we asked whether the rise of anti-Semitism should have impact on Israel's plans for the war. As you can see here, there is a very clear consensus. Some of you might understand why, and some of you might feel that this consensus is too broad and too definitive. But by and large, Israelis, 90% of them say that the fear of attacks against Jews abroad should not affect Israel's war plans. They see Israel's war as existential for Israel and hence existential for the Jewish people. And they probably say to themselves, we all suffer. We understand that Jews abroad also share some of this burden. And that's the way it is for Jews all around the world today. And we see no way in which we can change it now before we win the war. So, Yaakov, thank you for the time. And
Shmuel, just before you jump, the big takeaway here, I think for politically speaking, Netanyahu doesn't have it so great, right? The army is the trust in the army is climbing back up. People are very skeptical about day after solutions, that going back to the old models of what we thought, but there aren't really any innovative ideas that are out there that I at least, or I think any of us can see working. So what is, and obviously take everything that you would tell me, even that take every poll with a grain of salt while the cannons are still firing. But how would you sum it all up as the political takeaway from this?
Well, I think that both as a matter of policy, of social, thinking about the politics, the policy, and Israel's society, the only real thing that we can see that's very clear is the wish of Israelis to end this war in victory.
In a clear, decisive victory.
Clear and decisive victory over Hamas. And I think that this is something that is the overall theme of everything. Yeah. If Netanyahu wants his numbers to improve, he has no choice but to see this war coming to a successful end. The support for the IDF means we root for the soldiers because we see them, we see their energy and their enthusiasm and their determination to win the war. All the debates about the day after will change if Israel wins the war. When Israel wins the war, things will be much clearer, and then we might have the ability to have the day after debate in a calmer type of atmosphere. Right. If Israel doesn't win the war in a clear and decisive way, the debates and the differences and the blame games that we will play because of the indecisive result are going to complicate things even more than they are now.
And that raises a whole other question of what is the definition of victory of this war, which will have to be for another.
Uproot Hamas. I think Israelis do not want to see Hamas in power in Gaza when the war ends.
Yeah, of course. But hostages and all that. Whole other conversation that we've had in the past. Shmuel, thank you so much for joining us. I want to shift gears for a moment and go to the other topic, which a bit gloomier, which is about the attacks on women and the way that that's been accepted or not accepted around the world. And Alona, I thought to start with you in this piece that you wrote recently in Moment. You wrote about this October 20th report from UN Women, which spoke about, it's this UN organization dedicated to protecting gender equality. It wrote all about all the people who have been displaced and uprooted from all over the Gaza Strip, but no mention of the crimes that were committed against Israel, and actually today against Israeli women on that October 7th day. And even today I saw on Twitter a video of a clip of an interview that the deputy director, Sarah something of UN Women did with a CNN anchor, and asked about it. Well, we have to wait for independent, investigation committee, the usual diplomatic blah blah that makes no sense. So Alona, kind of explain to us what is going on here. Why is this the situation, and what does this mean?
Okay, I will first say that I was surprised too. I had to read all the reports of the UN Women and the human rights organizations that wrote about the attack, and I see nothing about sex crimes. And it was shocking because even though the Israeli press also was quiet about it in the beginning, because, it's something that's uncomfortable to discuss. It may be the victim need to be dignified and so on. But I was very surprised, but we start to hear testimonies from the paramedics that came to the scene, from the Shura camp that saw the bodies and the testimonies of the eyewitnesses, and even the investigation of the Hamas terrorists, and nothing. There was completely silence, and it's shocked me because in the beginning of the criminal law, it was silence. We came back to the silence that broke only in the Geneva Convention in 1949, and even then it was a crime against the honor of the women, only the society sociological honor, and only in the Rwanda and Yugoslavia tribunal courts it was the first time that recognizes a crime, and afterward the ICC. And then I thought the UN Women that helped to build this criminal court will write about it. And I did some research, very, very, new one, and talk about with colleagues and try to understand why the silence is still, you can say, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, so on. But I think it's more than that. For a very, very long period, the struggle was very clear. There was the strong and was the weak. There was the Palestinian and there was the Israelis. Always the Israelis was the strong part that occupied the territory. Some suggest that made a lot of crimes, and this was the point of view of all the women organization and the human rights organization. And I think that this made them very empathy with the Palestinian people. They feel that they are identification with them. We can see it when it happened if we speak about sex crimes, when it happened with a very famous figure like a singer or a president, when we will accuse him in such crime, we will be silent, and even worse, we will deny it. It can't be. He will do such horrific things. And I think it's happened again here in Gaza, because all the time the Palestinians were the weak side. So it's not goes with the narrative, the template that all this organization made. There is good, there is bad, and the Israeli always went in the wrong side of the deeds. And now it's very confusing, and they can't read the map. And I think it's a very, very big mistake, because the same feminist organization that led to so many important changes in the international criminal law now silent, and in the intersection between the feminist identification and the identification with the Palestinian side, they choose to ignore the feminism, and it's very, very sad, and we have to do something about it. And this is why I'm very happy that we talk about and write about it, to tell the world, wake up. This is only the beginning.
Right. Now, these crimes have been well documented. I know that the police have launched an investigation. They've put the 443 or 433 unit, which is like the Israeli equivalent almost of something of like a higher degree of like almost FBI-like, that's been looking into this. Dozens of testimonies, as you said, the interrogations of the Hamas terrorists who spoke about what were asked, why did you take the women? Why did you take the young girls? And as a matter of fact, the answer is to rape them, right? I mean, it shocks you to your core.
To rape them, and they even document it. We have film that the terrorists took themselves, and we can see it. And this is the shocking thing, that even when the testimony is in front of the feminists, and I talk as a feminist myself, it's horrific. It's
so
shocking.
Gil, you wrote a piece earlier on in the conflict at the end of October that was more about where are the feminist organizations, right? You spoke about how you wrote about how feminist organizations, typically whenever there's a conflict, all of them come together and condemn Israel. But here there was this absolute silence. And now we have the UN Women with their absolute silence. And we have people who question the accusations. There was that petition that was going around. There was that Alberta University woman, head of the sexual crime center, whatever. Assault, that who was fired because she had signed on to this letter. So at least there was some price to be paid for that. But what is the source? What is the core? Why can they not, as Alona was referring to, why can they not recognize that Jewish Israeli women were sexually assaulted?
It is indeed horrific. It's stunning. I'm sad to say it's not surprising, because it actually is a form of corruption that has been building for many, many years. So in historical perspective, let's go back to the 1590s when Shakespeare writes in the name of Shylock, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you rape us, do we not suffer? How could this crime, which is indeed the largest, most self-publicized, most self-promoted act of gendered violence in history, be so ignored? It was in our faces. It was spread. It was delightfully spread. They were so proud of their crimes until they started seeing a backlash, and then they denied it. And the degree to which the Palestinians, and I'm sorry to say it's not just Hamas, but the Palestinians are able to play with truth, precisely because of what Alona was talking about, this cognitive dissonance. Oh my goodness, I'm on the Palestinian side. That means the Palestinians must be perfect. It must be this decolonialism where there's have to be only the powerful and the weak, the oppressor and the oppressed. The oppressed always has to be holy. The Palestinians in particular have pulled this con on the world that they are holy. And so the first element is there is, I'm sorry to say, a strong sense of anti-Semitism there. Number two is we do see that the feminist movement has been hijacked by the forces of intersectionality, by this decolonialization, which is a different agenda than the feminist agenda. And third, when we focus on what's going on in the United States of America in particular, Look at the conversation of the last 10 years, the Me Too movement. The degree to which women who have endured humiliations 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago are not just allowed, but encouraged, enabled, respected to tell their story. And this story of girls, of broken pelvises, and I'm sorry to go into the detail, of something that was so explicit is deemed to be not valid, is just an act of, it's an assault on truth, it's an assault on liberalism, it's an assault on Jews, it's an assault on Zionism, and it's an assault on feminism. I call this the triple double cross. You betrayed us, you threw the Jews under the bus. You betrayed liberalism and academia, we're used to that, but you also betrayed yourselves. And I don't think we should let them off the hook. I think we have to be very, very careful, not just in the UN, but in the feminist movement. I think anybody who's given money over the years, I think anybody who's supported the feminist movement, I think has to call them out. Well, 2 years ago in May 2021, 120 gender studies departments came out immediately with an attack on Israel for defending itself against Hamas and put it in gender terms. And this act of specific gendered violence hasn't gotten not one criticism from gender studies departments, except in Israel. And I've been looking and looking and looking because I don't want to say something that's inaccurate. The truth is on our side, and I want to be very, very careful about what has been said and what hasn't been said. And thank God for some Israeli feminists. Thank God, at least, for you, Alona, and others who stand up and are not worried about being popular at the next UN gathering, the next feminist gathering, but you're standing for truth.
But Gil, is it because these women are Jewish? That's what it is, right? Jewish blood is cheap, and now we could say, we've been saying that for a long time, and now sadly we can say Jewish women are cheap.
The word I regret not using enough in my article, because I wrote it a couple of weeks ago, was dehumanization. And that goes back to the Shakespeare quote, because dehumanization is really at the essence of bigotry. And by the way, many intersectional writers love to write about dehumanization and how that is key to all forms of bigotry, again, except when it comes to the Jew. And the degree to which Israelis and Zionists have been dehumanized, the degree to which this oppressed paradigm, and the degree to which Palestinians have been given a cleanse, it's the great con of modern times, has allowed Jews once again to be dehumanized. And unfortunately, it falls on very familiar, all too familiar historical tropes, and we call them today historical memes, and to watch it happen again in front of our faces, in real time, with the criminals recording themselves, is truly absurd.
Yeah.
But to lighten the conversation just a little bit, Israelis specialize in gallows humor, and I always worry when there aren't enough jokes in a wartime, and there have been very, very few jokes in wartime. But one joke I did hear, the first joke I heard about this war was, if gaslighting is when you say something and then you deny you said it, Gaza lighting is when you commit all kinds of sex crimes and you deny you did them.
You're reminding me just of yesterday, one of the Palestinian prisoners was released, and the swap was this, I don't know, teenage boy who had participated in a terrorist attack, and he leaves. You see the video of him leaving jail. Fine, looks great, nothing wrong. And then he's interviewed at home, I think by Al Jazeera, and both arms are in a cast. And he says that Israel broke his arms in the torture. and the world spreads this. So Alona, what I was thinking, and just off the top of my head, no foundation in any research here. But one of the issues is, I think, for liberal progressives also, and maybe you kind of see this with the posters that are being ripped down all the time across the world of the hostages, is everyone likes to see a level playing field, right? It's like when you watch two teams playing football, basketball, whatever it is, against one another, you want to see maybe both have the chance to win, and if not, root for the underdog, let's say. But here, we're perceived, as you said before, as the occupier, as the aggressor. That's how they've always perceived us. Now Hamas is the aggressor, is the violent side. Okay, so you could say, well, they're resisting, they're freedom fighters. You could try to create some sort of moral equivalency, and we see people trying to do that all the time. By the way, with the hostages, you see people doing that, right? That some news organizations have tried to say, like the Washington Post, captives were released. Well, These people who we released are not captives. These are terrorists, right? These are and those are hostages that were taken, little children. But everyone is always searching for the moral equivalency, and that's why I've always thought they rip off the posters, because they don't have a way to respond to that. There's nothing we've done to them that can maybe balance that. And I wonder here too, if the rape and the sex crimes, and the reason that they have nothing else to say, so it's just so much easier to just deny that it ever happened, is also because of that. Because there's nothing they can say, well, oh no, but Israel, no, 1 second, Israel doesn't rape. Or no, Israel doesn't do that. So the easier thing to do is pretend it didn't happen.
Yes, I think this is it. And I want to say that we talk about silence, but it's not silence. It's worse than silence. It's deny. To deny, it's active. It's violent. It's say the victim, it didn't happen to you. And I think the serious thing here, it's not now who is doing it. Before it was the generals, the men that fought the war, and they feel privilege. Now the feminists do it. The feminists that fought this fight, the feminists that wrote all these agendas, all this talk about it everywhere. They do the not only silent, denied, and I think it's more active. I think it's more violent. I think it has to be discussed, because it's not only silent. It's worse.
The great cover-up. That's what
yes,
it is.
yes, because it's not happened, but it happened. They say they did it. They feel it. They feel it. There is a lot of testimony. You can see the picture, but they deny. This is worse than silence.
Gil, we've spoken about this before in previous episodes, but just of the great failure of academia throughout this whole war, and what's been happening to Jews on campuses, and what's been happening with professors who have come out. I mean, this is another example, but I think it's really scary when you look at what's going on, particularly in the United States, and you see in what are supposed to be the best of the schools, the places of the greatest education, and these are not safe places anymore for Jews. These are not safe places at all for Israelis.
And the gap between, again, how well documented these crimes are and the level of, I accept Alon's word, the denial. And indeed, feminists have been saying, silence, group silence on these things is consent, but also they're saying silence is violence. And let me add, I have a friend, Miriam Schler, who does holy work in Tel Aviv with Women's Rape Crisis Center. And she says that women in Tel Aviv, just watching what happened, who had been abused before, were re-traumatized simply by seeing the silence, simply by seeing how easily women were targeted, and then how the world turned. And so the betrayal of feminists is not just a betrayal on a political level, it's on the deepest existential level, not just of themselves, but really of the sisterhood. It's a violation of the sisterhood. And this goes absolutely to the rotten academia, that the problem is in academia, you're supposed to reason forward. You have a set of facts, you might have your theories, you might have analysis, and you go forward. The problem with this approach these days is you have the conclusion that you want. So Hamas, good. Palestinians, holy and blameless. And then what you do is you reason backwards. And God forbid any facts like mass rape, self-publicized and self-promoted, gets in the way, and you just bulldoze over that. That's not teaching our students, our PhDs, to think critically, to think in an open-minded way. That's propaganda. And that undermines a society, because when you turn to your universities, especially your elite universities, and the centers of those universities become centers for that kind of doctrinaire thinking, we're modeling ourselves on communist China, on the Soviet Union. And it's heartbreaking for me to say that, because I worshiped the old form of academia. We're modeling ourselves on all the wrong models. And look carefully, this isn't just an issue of a college president here and a professor there. Look at the learned societies. Look at what's happening in the American Historical Association and in the Women's Studies Associations. It's the associations themselves which determine my ability to advance with tenure, because I have to turn to other colleagues to get tenure letters and evaluations and fellowships. There is where the rot is. And they see themselves as frontline actors in some kind of decolonial revolution, while of course enjoying their cushy salaries and their tenure. Let's put that out too. The levels of hypocrisy are just despicable when we see the way women were literally raped to death, and these professors in their cushy positions then sit and theorize about it and call themselves exhilarated. And then when they're forced to apologize, only apologize for the choice of words, but not for the tone.
Not to mention the fact, and this is based on no statistics, but college campuses and universities are not exactly known for being best at protecting women against sexual assault, either of faculty or of students themselves. So you would have expected that this would be a place where there would be some moral clarity, but unfortunately, once again, we just see how when it comes to the Jewish people and it comes to Israel, the hypocrisy of the world is just so blatant, and we all have to make the conclusions that we have to make, right? But I don't think that, as Alona and you both said so and articulated so perfectly, with all the evidence in your face, and not to ignore, but not to be silent, but to deny, is in an active way, as Alona explained, is just so mind-blowing. I want to thank both of you, Alona Chagai Frey and Gil Troy, and earlier Shmuel Rosner. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Tomorrow, I just want to have one note. Tomorrow will be another episode of the JPPI Inside Analysis of the war, but we will be changing the format. Tomorrow will be the last of the 5-day-a-week format. We are going to be moving to a new format of doing this twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, a little longer, so we will have more time for more in-depth interviews with the people that we'll be interviewing. We will be continuing with the panels of our fellows to continue to give their perspectives on the different interesting side topics that are coming out of this conflict, like what we did this evening. But keep in mind, Mondays and Thursdays, that will be our new broadcast times as we continue to engage with you throughout the conflict. Thank you all very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.